Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining today's webinar on open innovation in practice. For those that don't know me, I'm Emma Den Hond, Program Manager at Startupbootcamp, where I help facilitate open innovation projects between our corporate clients and startups, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we start, a little background on Startup Bootcamp. Startup Bootcamp is a global industry-focused startup accelerator that launched in 2010. Since then, Startup Bootcamp has grown into one of the world's largest accelerators and the largest in Europe as well. We've invested in over 1,600 startups, building a portfolio valued at more than $5 billion. Startup Bootcamp not only invests in startups, but also supports corporations in collaborating with them, driving internal and open innovation worldwide. We count more than 400 products and services ideated, co-built, and launched with our clients, especially in consumer industries. Over the years of our collaborations, more than 1,500 startups investments have been made and 300 POCs have been supported between our clients and innovative startups and scale-ups. So to today, in our last webinar, we discussed the future of business growth through startup collaboration and talked about how corporates can leverage startup innovation to their benefit and turn challenges into opportunities. Today, we want to put what we've learned into practice by going directly to the source. For this reason, we've invited two special guests who will be speaking about their experiences with open innovation and corporate startup collaboration. So from the perspective of a corporate and from the perspective of a startup. To that end, I'm very happy to welcome Rachel Mast from Kraft Heinz and Douglas Aguiar from PhotonPath today. I've had the pleasure to work with both Rachel and Douglas through different open innovation projects we've done. With Rachel and a wider Kraft Heinz team, we explored different startup solutions that could help improve their master data management at Heinz. And Douglas was actually one of the 10 startups that was selected to be part of the Aguiar POC program, Powered, which we concluded back in July. First up on the stage, I'd like to welcome Rachel. Please give us a short introduction about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so nice to meet everyone, and thanks for having me. So like Emma said, my name is Rachel Mast, and I work at Kraft Heinz. If you're not familiar with what Kraft Heinz is, we're one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world. So I'm sure most people hopefully have had Heinz ketchup and some of our other great brands that we produce around the world. I currently am a group lead within the IT organization. So I specifically work on our portfolio management for all of our IT investments within kind of like our global teams within Kraft Heinz. But as Emma mentioned, we worked directly with Startup Bootcamp when I was in a previous role earlier this year around master data management. So setting up new customers, setting up new products, especially all of the data that goes into all of the delicious products that we make. Our team was kind of responsible for setting up all of that data. So had a lot of challenges in that space, and that's kind of where we turned to Startup Bootcamp to help us and find some unique solutions for that.
Cool, thanks Rachel. Really happy that you're here today as well. Douglas, give us a little intro.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emma, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Douglas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of PhotonPath. PhotonPath is a deep tech spin-off from Politecnico di Milano here in northern Italy. And I'm the CEO and co-founder, and we make basically hardware, deep tech hardware, and we make optical chips. We make devices that build up the internet, for instance. In this link, in this video call that we are having, behind the screens that we are using, there is a lot of optical fibers, and we make some of the components that lit up those optical fibers to support the internet that connects us all here. In addition to the components of the optical communications industry, we also are starting to operate into the optical sensing industry, and that's where the collaboration with Aguiar came as a very nice opportunity for us to step into that new market. And that's also something that we can definitely dig into more details on how we explored that opportunity to explore new markets and to make use of the products that we already have in the optical communications market in a new market with the support from Startup Bootcamp and the events that was organized. So glad to be here and glad to answer some of your questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Douglas. Before we start, just real quick, we want this session to be interactive, so please, throughout this whole session, you can submit your questions by using the chat function, or you can just raise your hand as well. Don't be shy. This is a conversation, so feel free to ask any questions, and we will address them during the next 30, 45 minutes or so with Rachel and Douglas. I'm going to kickstart the conversation, and Lauren will also help keep an eye out for any raised hands and questions in the chats to make sure that they're addressed. All right, let's start, guys. So first, I want to ask the obvious question, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with corporate startup collaboration? This doesn't only have to be in relation to what we did together, but anything in general as well. Rachel, you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So we worked, I kind of mentioned in my intro, but we worked directly with Startup Bootcamp earlier this year, where we held a sort of Shark Tank, if you've seen that show, Shark Tank sort of event, where we had a couple of different very specific problems that we were trying to solve within the master data space. One was kind of about, kind of trying to make our workflows more efficient. We had a lot of different workflow steps and things like that that had to happen. So trying to find a startup that could help us with that. And then also on some master data cleanup sort of activities, trying to find somewhere that could help us improve our data quality and then also help us with our vendor onboarding process. So had a couple of different use cases, and we did a lot of interviews with different startups, and then it kind of all culminated into a Shark Tank event where we came to Amsterdam. We came to the Amsterdam office with Startup Bootcamp, and we basically had like pitches from 10 different startups where they pitched us basically what their idea was, and then ultimately kind of selecting one or two that we wanted to pursue sort of that proof of concept with. So it was a really interesting program, I would say. I learned a lot about some of this very niche technology that's out there and what some of these startups are doing to help address some of these issues that really exist in a large corporation like ours. So it was a really great experience. I learned a lot. And I think it was also very, very cool to kind of help us like really think about the problems that we have and creatively how we can solve those.
Yeah, and I look forward to digging a little deeper into these challenges as well.
Yeah.
Douglas, how about you? You had a bit of a different experience.
Indeed, in our case, it's a bit, it's very challenging, mainly because we are a hardware company. So our products take time to be developed, to be adapted to some specific use cases. But even in that challenging environment, we managed to have some interesting POC projects with some big companies here in Italy, in particular, in the automotive industry, also in the aerospace industry. We do have some active projects going on, but as you can imagine, these are typically much longer in terms of timing. So there are some projects that takes 18 months even. Right? Because that's the time that we need to manufacture a new chip, to manufacture a new hardware. And you can be as agile as you can, but there are some manufacturing processes that needs to take time to go on. But even in that scenarios, we were able to put forward some interesting collaborations. And the key thing that was, let's say, helpful to the success of those projects were the strategic value of these activities to the corporations, right? In the sense that it was not something that was really related to the core activity of the companies to a point that they wanted to put forward that activity by themselves, but they were looking to some partners that could operate in those border areas on their strategic values, and that's where we started operating with a company like Brembo that makes braking systems here in Italy, and that's one of the typical scenarios where we look for our proof of concepts projects work.
Right. Okay. And I think you started answering it already a little bit, Douglas, but I would be curious to know, besides what the projects you've done in general, what do you guys think is the value of corporate startup collaboration? Rachel, I'll give you the floor first again. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, no, I can go first. So I think for us, I think one of the biggest values is that we can see kind of like that art of the possible. That's a word that we like to use a lot, is the art of the possible. I think sometimes when you're in a large company, you know, there's a lot of processes, there's a lot of policies, there's a lot of those things that have been in place for a long amount of time. And so sometimes you kind of can't always take that step back and really say, oh, well, there are these things that can help us do this differently, right? And really challenge our processes as well. So to me, that was one of the biggest values that we got out of it, was really just trying to see that art of the possible. I also think something that was valuable too is, you know, really understanding like what are these specific issues that we have internally. And I think what we always try to do is we try to take the technology that we have already and try to reuse that first, and then, you know, buy second, right? Like that's kind of one of our core philosophies. So I think it was also good for us to realize that instead of trying to customize technology that we have or trying to use something that we have, really trying to see what else is out on the market and what's being innovated there, especially in like the workflow space. That was an area that we have struggled with, right? We have a lot of workflows, we have a lot of processes, a lot of people who have to approve certain tasks. That was one of the main things we were trying to solve. So really kind of trying to see like what else is out on the marketplace was really, really, really helpful for us.
Yeah. Okay. And Douglas, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can add from the scale-up startup perspective of what we take as value from this kind of collaboration, and I'm really inclined to say that it is a very valuable market validation of your solution, right? And that's exactly what the startups need. They need to have the confirmation, or at least the indication that the solution that is proposed has value in the market, right? And that's the key thing that comes out. The challenging part is that the timing to have that kind of validation is always critical, because as I scale up, as I start up, we are always looking, the ground comes closer, right? I like the definition from Reid Hoffman that the startup is jumping out of a cliff and building the airplane on the way down. No? So the floor is always coming closer, and we need time, we need fast indications of that, right? So, and that means being very, very practical. That means revenues. That means having a business that can survive on its own. And for us, the value is really to have this fast feedback when the corporations understand that and are available and see the value in it, and have this confirmation and put forward your business and raise more money and build your own strategy and put forward your market validation.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess from what we've seen, that's also where there's a little bit of a gap between corporates and startups, that corporates definitely do not want to jump off a cliff and build their airplane while they're falling, basically. But that kind of leads me also, Rachel, what you just said, that you're kind of trying from the inside looking out. This is something a lot of corporates struggle with. So I kind of want to ask you, how do you experience the reception of internal teams when a team announces that they want to do open innovation projects? How is that usually received?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a large organization, right, there's always some inherent risk, I think, with any time you're going to do an open innovation, right? Because you know, there's a lot of competing priorities, there's a lot of those things. And we also have very established processes. So we don't want to bring something in that's going to hinder those, right? At the same time, though, I would say our company specifically is very open to innovation. We've had a lot of partnerships with other kinds of startups, not even just through this program, but through other types of programs. And I think we're very open to it. I think at the end of the day, we, you know, in order to get that buy-in, I would say from leadership, to be able to do those sorts of things, we have to be able to demonstrate what that value is, right? So what is the problem that we're trying to solve? I mean, I think there's a lot of technology out there now. You know, you talk about AI, you talk about all this other technology, and they're kind of these buzzwords, right? And so it's not just like, let's bring in all of this technology for the sake of bringing in the technology. Right. At the end of the day, we have to be able to have that strong business case to be able to to sell it to our leaders and to say, this is the problem, this can help solve that. And I think that's what we were trying to do with this program as well, is we had very, very specific problems that we didn't really have a solution for. And that's kind of where we turned to Startup Bootcamp and kind of this collaboration. So I think for us, it's people are very open to it. Again, you just have to create that business case and being able to showcase that value that it's bringing.
I think, yeah, that's really interesting because that's not obviously how many other corporates work. Do you have any kind of tips? How do you guys ensure this kind of enthusiasm or alignment also between the different teams that might have to collaborate during these open innovation projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things for us is that we have a lot of good business sponsors, big leaders within the company who are very open to that kind of innovation. They want to push the envelope on, again, I say like the art of the possible and on what we can really do to help drive efficiencies within the organization, to help think outside the box. I mean, I sit in more of the IT world, right? So we're more on that operations side, but even as a larger company, we're always trying to innovate our products that we're ultimately selling to the consumers. And so I think that kind of mentality of the innovation we're bringing to our consumers is trickling down also within our operations space, because at the end of the day, it all kind of works together. So I think that's one of the big things to drive the enthusiasm, is to really get like some kind of executive sponsor. And that's what we did as well. Seeing someone who's at the top who can kind of trickle that message down to the rest of the organization, I think is very, very key. I also think it's important to make sure that whenever you're doing some kind of innovation, whether it's, touching a big process, whether it's solving one of those small issues, I think you also have to just be very upfront about what that technology can do and what it can't do, right? So I think that was maybe one of the things as we were going on, we were learning is, the more that you can kind of hone in on what that specific issue is, I think the better that it will be to be able, again, to kind of sell that business case to leaders and then to get them to kind of bring other people along in that journey.
Right. Okay, so there's no sense of fear within people.
Well, I think there's always an inherent risk, right? I mean, and that comes with anything. That comes with any kind of innovation you're doing, whether we're making a new flavor of ketchup or whether we're making, something that's going to help our internal teams. There's always that inherent risk. But we have a lot of guardrails, I would say, set up to help protect us and to help make sure that we don't just, blindly do things. We have certain checks. We work with architects, we work with security, we work with all of those different teams in order to kind of do those cross checks before we go into something to validate those.
Right. Okay. Douglas, what challenges? Yeah, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, because as Rachel was talking, something came to my mind because as Rachel was describing the whole process of engaging everyone, it really made me think about the stage in which each company that you are engaging with, each startup is, and which one is more adequate for you to contact, right? And I think we would. I do not want to change your line of thought, Emma, but I think
go ahead.
Because it's since from your description, Rachel, you really look for innovation and for things that can start. It's really the beginning of the whole search of a solution, right? And the process that a startup does, right? So I think that is very important to make sure that the companies with which you are interacting with are in the proper phase of that, right?
Yeah.
In our case, for instance, everything went very well with Leander in the last program because for us it was a new business segment, right? So we were starting to explore that new business segment while we already had another business segment that was going on. For other companies, might be that they still do not have that first business segment, and that they might feel like it's a kind of a long shot for them, right? They might seem less engaged because the thing seems more abstract.
Right. I think that's a good point. And I think, Rachel, that was also one of the criteria we had, also the stage of the
Yes.
startup,
Yeah.
scouting for the different solutions. So it's definitely important. That's a good point, Douglas. But back to my question for you, Douglas. What challenges have you faced working with large corporations, and how did you still stay agile and innovative while addressing them?
I think that the key challenge is to know who to talk to understand pretty well the internals of the corporation, because differently from we are a small team. We are in 15 people, in our company, right? So we know it's pretty easy to understand how we operate as a company. On the other hand, to try to interact with a larger corporation, needed to understand well the dynamics, the internal dynamics, who approves, who does not approve, who is the decision maker, who are the possible, even the people that are against your kind of solution. So you need to map all of that. So I think that is one of the key challenges for any agile team, because we are used to have a very quick decision-making process, and in our corporation, not always is like this. And navigating into that ecosystem can be challenging, can be very challenging.
Yeah. Okay. And if we look a bit at what we talked about a little bit now, the whole building alignment and buy-in as well. Douglas, at what point, from what you've seen, do you think it becomes most relevant for corporates to start working with startups?
And now I need to contradict myself with respect to my comment to Rachel. That is, I think that it makes sense for a company to approach a startup that already has some indication on what that company wants to do, right? Because if you are in a stage that is very, very early, it's tough for you to put forward anything, right? And for us, everything is kind of amplified because we are a hardware company, So for us, all of these nuances are very, very amplified. That's why we feel it very, very, let's say, intensely. But I think that the best timing for a corporation to approach is when you have at least a solution that is already identified, right? For even some additional other markets, right? That the company does not need to have this solution for your problem. That thing will not exist, but at least something that they can demonstrate, that they can put on the table to show fast results. I think that's it.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think for us, right, we created very specific. We basically had kind of like a case, right? Like we basically gave these startups a case study where we said, hey, here's this very specific issue. Go take it, go figure it out, right? And we kind of had like three different things. We had three different prompts that we gave them. And one was a little bit vague. One was very, very specific. The ones that were very specific and who took that prompt, we were a lot more impressed with than the ones that were just super vague, right? And so I think that's another thing to think about is vague problems are going to lead to vague solutions, right? So I think it's something to really think about, especially when you're working with a startup, right? They've created a very niche solution because they saw a very specific problem within some sort of market, right? And so the more that you can really hone in on what is it that you're trying to solve, I think that'll help create more success too. Because to your point, like you don't want to just start engaging with a startup if you're like, yeah, we kind of have this issue, but we don't really know what it is. We kind of think it's an issue. We're not sure if it's an issue. You can't quantify the issue. I think the more that you can do that, and then it goes back to my earlier point too, the more you can quantify the issue, I think the more you can quantify that value that they're going to deliver.
But when are you guys, this was interesting for both of you guys to hear from you, when does a corporate, or in this case, Kraft Heinz, say, okay, we cannot do this in-house, let's try and find startups for this? And then for Douglas, when do you think corporates should actually start looking for startups for this? Because it could be that they're doing it wrong, right? So I'm just curious to hear when it is you start thinking kind of outside of this box.
Yeah. So for us, I kind of mentioned it, but we have sort of a philosophy when it comes to purchasing technology, right? So our first is always, can we reuse? Can we use something that we already exists? Can we make it work for whatever this issue is. The second is, can we buy something, right? So that's kind of where we would start to engage the startups. And then the third is, can we build it, right? Is there something we can do in-house? Maybe that's through a Power App, maybe that's through some kind of other development, right? So that's kind of our philosophy. So I think that's really when we would try to start looking out in the marketplace. And, we have certain external benchmarking, we can see what is out there, but I think for startups, again, it's kind of really figuring out if there is a very niche sort of issue that we're trying to solve, really understanding what exists out there in the marketplace.
Yeah. Okay. And Douglas, any opinions?
I think that for us, I need to use some cliches, but for us, the main problems, the problems that really attract a startup are the problems that keep our customers awake at night. So it must be something that is really reducing the revenues from the company. It is something that can improve by 10 times your market penetration. Must be really, really hairy problems, right?
Yeah.
And that's what attracts us, because we get the sense of urgency, right? And we get fast feedback. And so I think that what I start up, I scale up is usually looking for are some big, hairy problems that have actual impact on the business of the customers. And I think I can't be more blunt than that.
Yeah. But do you ever feel that corporates have tried to pursue startup collaborations, but they were not really ready for that yet? And what kind of stuff should they keep in mind to be ready?
I think it links to what Rachel mentioned, in the sense that, yes, if there are some broad problems that you do not even know how to initially address that, it becomes innovation theater, right? It becomes just trying to do things for the sake of doing innovation, right? If it is not something that you at least know that the business impact that you have, I mean, that's where you should start. We had some not so interesting experiences also in the past. It was a scenario exactly like this. So there were some research teams that were looking for different alternative solutions, but that had no idea of the actual business impact that would have in their operations.
Right.
I think that's a key point.
Okay. And Rachel, you briefly mentioned it before, but do you have any more deeper insights on how to get leadership buy-in to roll out open innovation projects within the company?
It can always be tricky. I mean, I think when leaders feel the pain of a problem, I think that's when you can really get their buy-in, right? So a couple of the issues that we were specifically trying to solve, I mentioned we had kind of like a workflow issue that we were trying to solve. It was a really long process. There were a lot of leaders who felt that pain, right? Because ultimately it impacted them, it impacted their teams. And then the other issue that we were really trying to solve is about vendor onboarding. We were trying to find a technology that could help us onboard new vendors, do some vetting, do some checks with data and things like that. And so there were a lot of pain points I think that leaders felt. And I think that's how it is at the end of the day, like making sure that those leaders understand what those pain points are. I think also just showing that enthusiasm as well with the innovations and getting them to get on board and make sure that they understand, what is the risk, but also what is that potential reward, I think is really important with the leaders. But it can be tricky at times, right? Because again, we are a large organization. We have certain checks in place that we can't just bring in a new technology, right? We have certain checks in place, but that's rightfully so, right? We have a lot of policies. We have a lot of people impacted. I mean, we're a food company, right? We have a lot of policies that we also have to follow. We're a multinational organization where we exist in a lot of different countries. And so there's a lot of those factors that go in, and it's not to stifle innovation. I think, like I said, our organization really wants to bring in all of that innovation and kind of be at the forefront for a lot of technology. But we also have to make sure that we do our checks and set ourselves up for success at the same time.
Yeah, and speaking of setting yourself up for success, I'm wondering, you guys already have a pretty good mindsets, it sounds like, towards open innovation. But is there like, what do you think is the most important mindset shift that corporates should make in order to be more open towards corporate startup collaboration as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that corporations really need to think about is having a proper proof of concept process. That's one thing that we have, but I'm sure that that is something tricky, right? I mean, there's a very traditional way that you go through a procurement exercise, right? You do an RFP, you go through the vendors, you vet them, you do service agreements, right? Like there's a very specific step that you go through. But sometimes that doesn't always work for these types of innovations, because we're not necessarily saying, hey, we're going to sign a 3-year agreement with this, software company. We're just saying we want to do a proof of concept, right? We want to see how does this work for 6 months and then kind of go from there. So I think that would be one of my biggest pieces of advice is corporations really need to make sure that they have a process set up for those sorts of proof of concept, right? Maybe it bypasses some of those traditional steps that we have to secure funding, to do those sorts of things. I think that's one thing that we're working on, and we've kind of established that proof of concept process to make sure that we're able to quickly innovate, right? I think the other thing to set up is, working with a startup is going to be very different than working with, a very large, SAP or like a Microsoft, right? One of these very, very large companies. And so I think we also have to make sure that we recognize that as well. Some of these startups that we talk to have 10 or 15 employees, right? That's very different. And so also having some insight and empathy, I guess, for those startups as well, to understand that they're working with a lot smaller resource group than maybe some traditional companies that we've worked with. And so I think it is a mindset shift. But there's also a lot of benefit that can come from that, because the other thing is working with a startup, sometimes you can help them innovate their product, right? If you have a very specific need that you have, they might change something. They can be super agile to help it fit what you need, versus some of these other larger companies, that's not always how it works. So there's definitely a lot of benefit there, but it is important to have a process set up front to allow for that type of innovation and maybe not follow like the traditional kind of path that might be there.
Exactly. And a piece of expectation management, I guess, like what you just explained. I see Douglas nodding in agreement already for 5 minutes, because I think this is very familiar to you, Douglas. I wanted to ask you, kind of on top of this question, what tips would you give corporates in order to ensure like a smooth process for corporate startup collaboration?
I think Rachel mentioned the key point, that is having a specific process to it. If that kind of innovation, it is a strategic path that the corporation wants to follow, you need to adapt, right? Because it's a different process, it's a different acquisition process, different timings. So you need to be ready for it and manage your expectations to it. We faced many situations in which, we were not still on the approved vendor list of the company, so we needed to wait 120 days to get the payment done. So so that's the one of the key, let's say, one of the key items that always pops up in companies that are starting to have this kind of process. And I think another important point is the mindset, of the fear of the not done here, right? Some companies have always this kind of fear or even restrictions on things that are not done internally, right?
Yes.
Because of your losing some of your assets, you'll be losing your skills to do that. And this mindset shift to put that thinking into the opportunities realm, and say, okay, we do not need to do everything, right? There are some specific areas in which are important for the company, but I can rely on some external suppliers for that solution. I think that those are the key elements, I would say.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. Then a question for both of you. Can you share any unexpected outcomes, either positive or challenging that arose from open innovation efforts? Or just, surprising?
I guess one thing that I was surprised about is like the issues that we were trying to solve. There's a lot of cool technology out there that can help do them that we were not aware of, right? I talk about some of the stuff we tried to do in the vendor space. I mean, there was a lot of really, I think we saw 3 or 4 different companies who are doing things in that space. Really, really cool stuff. So I think that was something that was surprising, is that, I think every company probably thinks that their issues or the things that they, are experiencing are very unique to them. And sometimes that, they are. So I think that was like reassuring to see. I think some of the challenges that we faced, I don't know if it was necessarily like unexpected, but some of the challenges were just, we didn't have a lot of time with each of the startups. So I think that can also kind of present its own challenges. Like we didn't really get to deep dive into all of their technology, didn't have a ton of time to kind of talk through all of the issues that we had. So, I think that's one thing that kind of came as a challenge. And then something that Douglas mentioned earlier, which I think is sort of going back to the last question, but also something internally, is who is the ultimate decision maker? I think that was something that we struggled with at times as well, is that, hey, this is great. This is awesome thing that we're doing. And then it's like, okay, well, now you need to talk to this person and this person, So I think that's something to make sure that you have established early on, is if we're going to do this, who's making that ultimate call? Who's going to make that decision?
Yeah, so I guess that's a challenge both the startups and corporates. Douglas, anything to add?
Yeah, to add on the challenge part and on unexpected things. Honestly, from the startup perspective, if you are not used of changing your ideas, on experimenting, on trying new things, you're not in the right mentality, right? So that is just to say that definitely we have seen many unexpected things, unexpected applications of our technology during these proof of concepts. But it's something that you do it so often, and not only during proof of concept projects, but on the normal day-to-day business discovery activities that we do. That's something that as a scale up, you must be used to these changes of direction, not change of direction, but more adjustments of your path. But one example that I can give was exactly on one specific project that we had with this automotive company. And we were discussing some specific applications for the kinds of sensors that we are integrating into their products. And then we discovered that the same sensor, just adapted in a different way, would be able to measure not only temperature, but also vibrations, right? Things that completely unrelated, but that had completely different business value for the customers. So we say, okay, that's a minor adjustment for us, but for the customer, it has a lot of value. So that's a typical thing that comes up in the day-to-day discussions during proof of concepts.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks. We're slowly going to wrap up. So, as a last question, any advice you would give to corporates and startups on why they should do corporate startup collaboration, or maybe shouldn't do it? Any last words on that?
Oh, well, I definitely think that you should do it. I think it can really open your eyes to the possibilities of what kind of technology is out there. And, at the end of the day, even if maybe it doesn't work out or you don't go through with a proof of concept, I think just understanding what is out there in the marketplace can really help you challenge some of the processes that you have internally. I know that's, for us, it really helped us kind of take a step back and say, wait, why are we even doing some of these processes the way that we're doing it? Because this technology exists, we could really shift, the way that we work. So I definitely think it's worth it, right? I think it's a great program. I do think, though, if we had to do it over again, I mean, I think a couple of the things that we really needed to probably establish was, one is having a very, very strong business case of what is the problem that we're trying to solve. I know I mentioned that before, but I think that's so important. Don't try to boil the ocean with what you're trying to solve, but also don't be so narrow that it's really only going to elicit a couple of potential startups that might be in that market. Because I think we kind of had both of those issues at times. We had some issues that were very broad, but then other ones that were super narrow. And so it kind of created a smaller pool of potential startups to work with. So I think that's one. Again, what I mentioned is really understanding, okay, if we're going to go through with a proof of concept, do we have a process established up front? Do we know who's making the decision? Do we, are there certain steps that we can bypass? Or are there certain steps that we must go through regardless of, if we're implementing a huge software or if we're just kind of going through with this proof of concept. And then I think the last one is really understanding what the tolerance for risk is. And when I say risk, I'm not talking about, some crazy thing to happen, but also like a financial risk, right? Because there's going to be a financial element to do a proof of concept or test out some kind of technology. So understand, what is that tolerance for risk? If we spend a certain amount of money and it doesn't work out, are we okay with that? Really establishing that with leadership up front, and also being able to have that runway to take the risk, right? And potentially fail, but also potentially create something great, I think is really important to think about.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Douglas, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I can add from the startup perspective. That is, I would say, pursue a proof of concept project if and only if the opportunity does not end on that proof of concept, right? If you have a path forward on making that thing recurring and making that an actual business for your company.
Right.
Because there are many companies, corporates out there just doing POCs for the sake of doing POCs, right?
Yeah.
I think it is worth thinking a bit on what is the future prospect of that, right? Because
Exactly. Yeah.
Otherwise, you just become a consultancy company and that's it, right? You need an actual business to build.
So having the bigger vision in mind, basically, as well. Awesome. Okay, guys. On that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Douglas and Rachel. It was really great to hear from you. I hope our audience learned a lot today as well. I know I have. Lauren shared my contact details in the chat. For anyone who wants to learn more about open innovation, please feel free to reach out to me via email or LinkedIn as well. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.